Let's get the ugly part out of the way first, shall we? A quick and dirty recap of how my life imploded. My wife, the brilliant Dr. Eris Thorne, decided that a husband who'd put his own dreams on ice to fund her medical ambitions, and two amazing kids who thought she hung the moon, were inconvenient accessories. Her career, a glittering ascent into the stratosphere of surgical robotics, required a sleeker, more streamlined model of existence. This model apparently included her mentor, a man with a god complex and a Patek Philippe watch, and did not include me or my quaint artistic pursuits. So she performed a marital amputation with the same cold precision she used in the operating room. She took the house, she took the kids, and as a final little twist of the scalpel, she had her shark of a lawyer add a clause to our custody agreement. This little gem prohibited me from discussing my art with my own children, labeling it a destabilizing influence. Just like that, the very core of who I was, the passion she'd once claimed to adore, was legally classified as a toxin. So, there you have it. Life ruined, family gone, soul filleted. The end. Or so she thought. The air in the lawyer's office was worth more than my car. It was filtered, chilled, and probably infused with the scent of crushed hopes and billable hours. I sat there, feeling my cheap suit cling to me under the fluorescent glare, a stark contrast to Aris, who looked like she'd been sculpted from ice and ambition. She was immaculate in a steel-gray dress that probably cost more than my first-year college tuition, the same tuition I'd paid for by selling charcoal portraits in the park. The irony wasn't lost on me. It was just another exhibit in the museum of my own personal screw-ups. Her lawyer, a man named Preston, who smiled without using his eyes, slid a document across the vast mahogany table. Just the final signature, Liam, on the addendum. The addendum? I asked, my voice hoarse. We'd been through everything. The brutal division of assets, the heart-wrenching custody schedule that reduced my fatherhood to every other weekend and a 2-week summer slot. What else was there to take? Preston's smile tightened. A minor clarification regarding the children's developmental environment. Aris, perhaps you'd like to explain. He deferred to her, the queen to his knight. Aris leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hands resting on the table. She didn't look at me, but at a point somewhere over my shoulder, as if addressing a junior resident. Liam, we both agree that Leo and Maya's stability is paramount, she began, her voice the same calm, measured tone she used to explain complex medical procedures. Given your recent life changes, and the inherent instability of a career in the arts, I think it's best we create clear boundaries. Boundaries? I echoed, the word tasting like ash. What are you talking about, Aris? Preston cleared his throat, a sound like gravel being gently stirred. He read from the page, his voice devoid of all human emotion. Pursuant to Section 4B, subsection or 3, the parties agree that the father, Mr. Liam Henderson, will refrain from discussing his artistic endeavors, or involving the children in activities related to his painting, sketching, or other creative pursuits, as these have been deemed a destabilizing influence on their structured development. The words hung in that expensive, sterile air. I stared at him, then at her. My art. The one thing that was truly mine, the thing that had connected us in the beginning, when I'd sketched her 1,000 times on bar napkins and cheap sketch pads. The way I had taught my son, Leo, how to see the shapes in the clouds, and my daughter Maya, how to mix blue and yellow to make the perfect green for a forest. Destabilizing. You can't be serious, I whispered. A laugh, brittle and sharp, escaped my lips. You're not serious. This is a joke, right? Aris finally met my gaze. There was no flicker of shared memory, no hint of apology. just the cool assessment of a problem being solved. I'm perfectly serious, Liam. They need structure. They need to understand the value of a tangible, successful career path, not hobbies. Hobbies. That was it. That was the moment the last flickering ember of the man who had loved her died. It wasn't the affair, which I'd discovered through a conveniently left-open laptop. It wasn't the missed school plays or the lonely nights. It was this, the deliberate, calculated erasure of my identity. She hadn't just left me. She was trying to unmake me. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw a stranger. A beautiful, brilliant, terrifyingly empty stranger. She had chosen her legacy of steel and code and sterilized success. My hand trembled as I reached for the pen. I could fight it, I supposed. Drag this out for months, drain what little money I had left and scar the kids even more in the process. Or I could sign it. I could sign it and let that signature be a declaration of war. Not on her, not anymore. On the life she thought she'd condemned me to. I scrawled my name, the ink bleeding slightly on the page. I pushed the document back across the table. "There," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You have your boundaries." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I didn't look at her again. I walked out of that office, past the ficus tree that was probably rented, and into the gray, unforgiving city. The cold knot of rage in my stomach wasn't just there anymore. It was starting to feel warm. It was starting to feel like fuel. She had chosen her career over our family. Fine. I would choose my happiness over her manipulation. And my happiness would be a masterpiece she would never see coming. My new life began in a place that smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a walk-up, with a view of a brick wall and a symphony of alley cats that performed nightly. It was the polar opposite of the sun-drenched, open-plan house I'd helped design, the house where Aris now lived with the ghosts of our family. I landed a job at a small, soulless marketing firm called Synergy Solutions, a name that promised everything and meant nothing. My job was to churn out logos and website banners for companies that sold things like artisanal dog biscuits and subscription boxes for socks. It was the artistic equivalent of a life sentence in a beige cubicle. Every click of the mouse felt like a betrayal to the artist I used to be. The weekends with Leo and Maya were a special kind of torture. They were bright spots of chaos and love in a monochrome existence, but they were framed by Aris's subtle, persistent campaign of psychological warfare. "Daddy, Mommy got us a VR headset," Leo announced one Saturday, his eyes wide with the wonder of corporate-sponsored joy. "She said her company invented the chip inside it." "Wow, that's great, buddy," I'd said, looking at the slightly lopsided pancake I'd just placed in front of him. My grand contribution to his weekend. Breakfast. It was a constant barrage of 1,000 tiny cuts. She'd call during our time, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Just checking in," she'd chirp. "Are you sure they have enough to do in your place? I can always send the driver to pick them up early if they're bored." My place. She said it like it was a contagious disease. The kids, innocent and impressionable, started to parrot her worldview. "Why don't you have a real job, Daddy?" Maya asked one evening, her big brown eyes so much like mine, looking up at me with genuine confusion. We were coloring on the floor, and I'd just shown her how to shade a sunset. A brief, illicit moment of art. I froze. "What do you mean, sweetie? I have a job." "Mommy said your job is a hobby, and that real jobs make the world better, like hers." I felt the air leave my lungs. She wasn't just erasing me from her life, she was redacting me from theirs. The destabilizing influence clause was a specter in every interaction. I couldn't take them to a museum without feeling like I was violating parole. I couldn't even doodle a cartoon horse for Maya without a flash of panic, imagining Eris's lawyer appearing in a puff of smoke and brimstone. So I stopped. I packed my canvases and paints away into a closet that I kept locked. The silence in the apartment grew louder. My nights became a blur of cheap whiskey and bad television. I was drinking to numb the feeling of being a ghost in my own life. I hit my low point on a Tuesday night. I'd gotten a call from Maya's school about a dads and donuts morning. I'd been looking forward to it all week. An hour before I was supposed to leave, my phone buzzed. It was Aris. "Liam, slight change of plans," she said, her voice breezy. "Dr. Alistair is presenting at Maya's school for Career Day, and he's offered to take her. It's a fantastic networking opportunity for me, and frankly, it's a better look for her than, well, you know, he can do the donut thing with her." She didn't even wait for a response before hanging up. I sat there, in my Synergy Solutions polo shirt, holding a box of stale donuts. He, her boss, her lover, was taking my daughter to Dads and Donuts. It was so absurdly, cruelly perfect that I just started laughing. A hollow, broken sound that echoed in the empty apartment. That was the night I almost gave up. I stared at the bottle of whiskey, at the bleakness stretching out before me, and I felt the pull of simply letting go, of accepting the narrative she had written for me. Failed artist, failed husband, ghost of a father. And then, my phone rang. An unknown number with a coastal area code. I ignored it, but it rang again, persistent. With a sigh, I answered, ready to snarl at some telemarketer. "Is this Liam Henderson?" A woman's voice crackled, sounding like gravel and sea salt. "Who's asking?" I grumbled. "It's your Aunt Ilara. Don't use that tone with me. I used to change your diapers." Ilara, my mother's estranged, eccentric sister, a celebrated painter who had scandalized the family by running off to live in an artist commune decades ago. I hadn't spoken to her in years. "Ilara, how did you—" "Your mother told me what that piranha of an ex-wife did to you," she cut in. "No time for pleasantries. She also told me you're living in some beige box and designing logos for dog food. Is that true?" "It's artisanal dog biscuits, actually," I muttered. She snorted. "Even worse. Listen to me, Liam. The city is eating you alive. It's a meat grinder for souls, and yours is halfway to becoming a sausage. I have a guest cottage. It's small. It's probably got a leaky roof, but the view of the ocean is worth a damn. Get out of there. Come here and remember who you are." I hesitated. Run away? It felt like admitting defeat. "I have my job, my kids." "You have a soul-sucking gig and supervised visits with your kids, who are being systematically brainwashed by a narcissist," she retorted. "You're not doing them any favors by letting yourself rot. The sea has a way of washing away the bullshit, Liam, and you, my boy, are neck-deep in it. The offer's on the table. Call me when you grow a spine." She hung up. I sat there in the silence, her words ringing in my ears. Neck-deep in bullshit. She wasn't wrong. I looked around the sad little apartment, at the box of donuts, at the locked closet door hiding what was left of my soul. Aris wanted to erase me. Fine. Maybe I needed to be erased. Maybe I needed to wash away the man I'd become in that gray city so I could find the one I'd lost. The next morning, I emailed my resignation to Synergy Solutions. I packed a single bag, leaving the rest of the ghost's life behind. And I drove towards the coast, towards a leaky roof and an ocean view, with no idea what I was doing, only knowing that anything had to be better than this. The town of Port Blossom wasn't so much a town as a happy accident. It was a chaotic jumble of brightly colored houses, wind chimes, and improbable sculptures made of driftwood and sea glass, all clinging to a cliffside overlooking the Pacific. It was the kind of place Aris would have sterilized with a flamethrower, I loved it instantly. Ilara's property was the town in microcosm. Her house was a vibrant explosion of purple and turquoise, surrounded by a garden that was less cultivated and more enthusiastically feral. Wind sculptures spun and clanged in the salty breeze. The air smelled of turpentine, salt, and blooming jasmine. Ilara herself was exactly as I remembered, only more so. She was a whirlwind of graying braids, paint-splattered overalls, and a voice that could strip varnish. She greeted me with a hug that threatened to crack a rib. "You look like hell," she announced, holding me at arm's length. "Thinner, paler, like a plant that's been kept in a closet. Good, we've got a baseline." The guest cottage was just as she'd described. It was a simple, one-room affair with a bed, a small kitchen, and a perpetually damp feeling. But on the north side of the cottage was a small, attached room with a sloping glass roof and a wall of windows that faced the churning gray-blue ocean. A studio. It was empty, save for a single wooden easel standing in the center like a lonely sentinel. "The previous tenant was a potter," Ilara said, following my gaze. "Left it behind. Use it, don't use it. Just stop looking like a kicked dog." For the first week, I didn't use it. I walked. I walked for hours along the rocky shoreline, letting the relentless roar of the waves scour the inside of my head. I watched the fog roll in and burn off, watched the gulls wheel and cry overhead. I slept, a deep, exhausted sleep I hadn't known in years. I was detoxing from my old life, from the city, from the constant, low-grade humiliation. Slowly, tentatively, I started to sketch. I didn't go into the studio. I sat on the damp sand with a cheap notebook and a piece of charcoal, drawing the twisted shapes of the cypress trees, the jagged lines of the rocks. There were no people in my drawings, no faces, just landscapes that felt as bruised and battered as I did. One afternoon, Ilara stormed into the cottage without knocking, holding one of my discarded sketches. "This is angry," she said, jabbing a paint-stained finger at the paper. "And it's good, it's honest. Now stop doodling on the beach like a depressed teenager and get in the damn studio. Paint it. Paint the anger." Her bluntness was the catalyst I needed. That evening, I walked into the studio. I bought a large canvas and tubes of paint from the local art supply store. Not the carefully selected, expensive brands I used to use, but cheap generic stuff in bold primary colors. I put on the old grunge rock playlist from my college days, music Eris had called unrefined noise, and I faced the blank canvas. And I painted. I didn't paint a landscape, I painted a feeling. I squeezed black and gray paint directly onto the canvas, smearing it with my hands, with a palette knife, with anything I could find. It was a storm. A chaotic vortex of rage and grief. There was no technique, no plan. It was a primal scream rendered in oil and acrylic. When I was done, hours later, I was exhausted, covered in paint, and my hands were raw. But for the first time in years, the silence in my head was gone. I kept painting. Each canvas was a piece of my unraveling. I painted the sterile white of the lawyer's office, the suffocating beige of my cubicle. I painted a faceless woman in a lab coat, turning her back on a vibrant, chaotic garden where two small figures played. My art was raw, ugly, and more honest than anything I had ever created. One day, while I was lost in my work, Ilara came in with another woman in tow. She was tall, with a cascade of dark, curly hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Liam, this is Chloe," Ilara said. "She owns the gallery in town, the one that doesn't sell paintings of seagulls to tourists. I told her you were doing something interesting." Chloe walked around the studio, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer platitudes or polite compliments. She just looked, her eyes lingering on the details, The jagged lines, the violent textures. She stopped in front of the painting of the faceless woman in the lab coat. "Who is she?" Chloe asked, her voice quiet. "My ex-wife," I said, the words feeling strangely distant. "She's not just a person in this painting," Chloe said, still studying it. "She's an idea, an absence. This is powerful stuff, Liam. It's narrative. What's the story?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was an email. A cold, official-looking PDF attachment from a law firm I didn't recognize. I opened it, my heart beginning to pound a familiar, frantic rhythm. It was a motion. A motion filed by Dr. R.S. Thorne to suspend my visitation rights, effective immediately. It was filled with legalese, but the message was clear. She'd attached photos of port blossom, a shot of a particularly wild-looking sculpture, a picture of a drum circle on the beach. She'd included a sworn statement from a concerned friend, I could almost smell her mentor's expensive cologne on it, describing my unstable lifestyle and transient, unconventional community. She was painting me as an unhinged derelict living in a cult, and my art as the evidence of my mental decay. The motion argued that exposing the children to such an environment was causing them emotional and psychological distress. I felt the blood drain from my face. The studio, which had become my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a trap. I had just started to breathe again, and she was already trying to suffocate me. I handed the phone to Chloe, my hand shaking. She read it, her lips tightening into a thin line. She looked from the legal document to the paintings surrounding us, and then back to me. A fire lit in her eyes. "Oh, she has no idea who she's messing with," Chloe said, a dangerous smile playing on her lips. "She thinks this is your weakness, Liam. This art, this story. We're going to make it your weapon." Chloe's gallery, named Penumbra, was a sleek, minimalist space of polished concrete and white walls. It was the last place I ever expected to see my messy, emotional canvases. But standing there with Chloe and Ilara, a crazy, terrifying plan began to take shape. "She's using your art against you in a legal filing?" Chloe said, pacing the length of the gallery. "That's not just malicious, it's stupid. She's given us a public platform. She's practically written the press release for us." "A press release for what?" I asked, still reeling from the legal notice. My first instinct was to hide, to pack up the paintings and prove I was the stable, boring father she wanted me to be. "For your show, of course," Ilara chimed in, leaning against a large, abstract sculpture. "You didn't think you were just doing this for therapy, did you? Art is meant to be seen, especially art that pisses people off." Chloe stopped pacing and turned to me, her eyes locked on mine. "Not just a show, Liam. A solo exhibition. We'll build a narrative. We'll tell the whole story right here on these walls. We'll show them what a destabilizing influence really looks like. It's not your art. It's her ambition. It's the sterile, emotionless world she chose over her own family." The idea was insane. It was audacious. It felt like jumping off a cliff and hoping I'd learn to fly on the way down. "She'll sue me into oblivion. Slander, libel, I don't know, all of it." "It's not slander if it's your truth expressed through art," Chloe countered, her voice ringing with confidence. "We won't use her name. We won't make explicit accusations. We'll just show the story, your story. Let the audience connect the dots. We'll call it The Architect of My Own Happiness." The title hit me like a punch to the gut. It was perfect. It was everything. But a piece was missing. The story felt incomplete, my word against hers. How could I make people see the subtle, insidious nature of her manipulation? How could I show them the 1,000 tiny cuts? The answer came to me a few days later, in the middle of the night. I was back in my cottage, sorting through a box of old hard drives I'd brought from the city, looking for photos of the kids, and then I found it. A folder I'd labeled Memories. But it wasn't just photos. It was a digital archive of our life together. And our life apart. There were emails, hundreds of them. Long, self-aggrandizing emails Aris had sent me from medical conferences around the world. Emails where she detailed her triumphs, her networking successes, her growing disdain for our simple life back home. Dr. Alastair said my presentation on robotic suturing was paradigm-shifting, one read. He thinks I'm on track for a department head position within 5 years. It's moments like this that make all the sacrifices worthwhile. I know you can't fully understand the pressure, but this is my legacy, Liam. There were voicemails, too. Audio files I'd saved without knowing why. Her voice, calm and detached, explaining why she'd missed Leo's birthday party or our anniversary. "Hi, it's me. Listen, I can't make it tonight. The team from Zurich is in town, and Alistair is hosting a dinner. It's a huge opportunity. I'll make it up to you. We can celebrate next week." We never did. My heart pounded in my chest. It was all there, the evidence, the proof, not in my words, but in hers. The next day I burst into the gallery, a USB stick in my hand. "I've got it," I said to Chloe, my voice breathless. "I've got the secret weapon." I explained my idea. We wouldn't just tell the story. We'd let her tell it. I would incorporate fragments of her own emails, her own voicemails, directly into the canvases, not as the main focus, but as a textural element, almost subliminal. A line of text stenciled faintly onto the wall of a painted house, a visual representation of a sound wave woven into the background of a family portrait. Chloe's eyes lit up. "Liam, that's genius! It's vicious and brilliant!" "Is it legal?" "I have no idea," she grinned. "But it's art. Let's do it." The next few weeks were a creative inferno. I painted with a fury I'd never known, fueled by caffeine, righteous anger, and the thrill of rebellion. Chloe handled the logistics, the promotion, the framing. Ilara was my gruff, unwavering cheerleader, bringing me food and telling me to dig deeper, to be bolder. Chloe's press release was a work of art in itself. It spoke of an artist silenced, of a legal battle over creative expression, and of a solo exhibition that would serve as the artist's testimony. It didn't name Aris, but it didn't have to. The story was too juicy, too compelling. The art blogs picked it up first, then local papers, then a national arts magazine. The buzz reached Aris. Her lawyer sent a cease and desist letter, a document filled with impotent rage and hollow threats. It accused me of harassment, of violating the spirit of our agreement, of attempting to profit from a personal tragedy. "They're scared," Chloe said, tossing the letter onto her desk. "This is just noise. It means we're winning." The legal threats only fanned the flames of publicity. The exhibition, once a small-town gallery show, was now a highly anticipated event. Aris, in her attempt to silence me, had given me the biggest megaphone I could have ever imagined. The architect was about to unveil his masterpiece. Opening night at Penumbra was surreal. The gallery, which usually hosted a quiet, contemplative crowd, was buzzing like a hornet's nest. The polished concrete floors reflected a sea of faces, sharp-suited art critics from the city, curious locals in flannel shirts, collectors with keen, assessing eyes, and journalists sniffing out the drama. The air was thick with wine, perfume, and a palpable electric tension. I stood in a corner with Chloe and Ilara, feeling like a man about to face a firing squad he had assembled himself. "Breathe," Chloe murmured, squeezing my hand. "Let the work do the talking." And it did. The exhibition was laid out as a journey. It started with my earlier, more commercial work from before the fall, bright, hopeful landscapes and portraits. Then, the tone shifted abruptly. The first piece from my new life was called The Addendum, a large canvas almost entirely black, with a single, vicious slash of white paint tearing through the center. If you looked closely, you could see the words from the custody agreement, destabilizing influence, repeated over and over, layered into the blackness like a subconscious whisper. People moved through the space slowly, speaking in hushed tones. They followed the narrative from the suffocating beige of synergy solutions to the chaotic, angry explosion of my first painting in the studio. Then they reached the heart of the show. The house on the hill was a portrait of our old home, the one I'd poured my heart into. But in my painting, the windows were black, hollow eyes, and stenciled so faintly onto the pristine white siding that you had to squint to read it was a line from one of Aris's emails. "This house isn't a home, Liam. It's a statement of my success. You have to see the bigger picture." I watched as a well-known critic leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he deciphered the text. A slow nod. He understood. The centerpiece was the diptych, the two large canvases hanging side by side that Chloe and I had named The Legacy. On the left, a cold, hyper-realistic painting of the silver surgical robot Aris was so proud of, all sterile lines and metallic sheen. On the right, a wild, vibrant, and messy abstract painting, a chaotic garden where two small, faceless figures played. It was everything she had given up, and, flowing between the two canvases, connecting them, was a pale blue line. The visual waveform of her voice from that final, damning voicemail. Beneath it, a small, museum-style placard simply read, "I'm sorry, I can't make Leo's play. Dr. Alistair wants me to scrub in on his new procedure. This is my legacy, Liam." You could hear the intake of breath from the people standing before it. The story was no longer just mine. It was theirs. They could hear her voice, read her words. I hadn't slandered her. I had simply quoted her. And then the sea of people parted. Aris was there. She stood at the entrance of the gallery, flanked by Preston, her lawyer, who looked profoundly uncomfortable. She was dressed in a severe black power suit, her face a mask of controlled fury. She had clearly come to cause a scene, to shut this down, to assert her dominance. But the room was silent. No one was looking at her with pity or anger. They were looking at the art. They were looking at her own words, her own ambition, laid bare on canvas. She swept her gaze across the room, her eyes landing on painting after painting. She saw her emails, her voicemails, her entire philosophy of life reflected back at her, not as a triumph, but as the cold, hard evidence of a crime scene. Her eyes finally fell on destabilizing influence. It was a portrait of Leo and Maya. Not with the expensive gadgets she bought them, but sitting on the floor of my run-down apartment, their faces lit with wonder as they looked at a simple drawing I had made for them. In the background, my own figure was a ghostly, transparent outline, fading away. And woven into the texture of the cheap rug were the words of her legal attack, branding me a danger to my own children. I saw a flicker. For the first time, a crack in the icy facade. It wasn't remorse. It was the shock of seeing herself through the world's eyes, through my eyes, for the very first time. The narrative she had so meticulously controlled had been hijacked. She opened her mouth to speak, to protest. But at that moment, a short, balding man with thick glasses, whom I recognized as Julian Croft, the most influential and feared art critic in the country, approached me. He completely ignored Aris. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. He didn't ask about the divorce, the custody battle, the drama. He pointed a thumb back at the legacy. The use of embedded text and audio visualization as a narrative device. It's not just a gimmick. It's a profound commentary on memory and manipulation in the digital age. You've weaponized the archive. He peered at me over his glasses. This is a masterpiece of confessional art, a testament to the resilience of the creative spirit." His words, delivered loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, were the final, killing blow to Aris's intentions. The story was no longer about a messy divorce. He had elevated it. It was about art, with a capital A. Aris stood frozen for another moment, her face pale. She was no longer the powerful Dr. Thorne, the victim of a bitter ex. In this room, surrounded by my truth, she was just the antagonist, the cold, lifeless figure in the paintings. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked out, her lawyer scurrying behind her. She hadn't been defeated by a lawsuit or a shouting match. She had been defeated by a story. My story, and she was its unwilling co-author. The aftermath of the exhibition was a tidal wave. Julian Croft's glowing review, titled "The Architect of Truth," went viral. My story, framed as a triumph of artistic integrity over personal and legal suppression, was irresistible. The show sold out, every last piece. The money was staggering, more than I'd ever dreamed of, but it was almost an afterthought. What I had won was so much more valuable. Aris's legal challenges evaporated. To pursue them now would only validate the narrative of the exhibition, painting her as even more vindictive. Her reputation in the highly gossipy medical and tech communities took a hit. Colleagues who had once admired her ambition now looked at her with a new, critical eye. The power dynamic between us had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. I was no longer the failed husband living in her shadow. I was a celebrated artist, and she was a footnote in my story. The most important change happened away from the galleries and the headlines. Armed with my newfound success, a formidable new lawyer Chloe had found for me, and the mountain of positive press, we went back to court. This time, the judge saw a very different picture. He saw a stable, successful father whose destabilizing influence was now hanging in the homes of wealthy collectors. The ridiculous clause was struck from the record, and the custody arrangement was renegotiated to an equitable 50-50th split. The victory felt quiet, personal, and profoundly sweet. The first time Leo and Maya came to stay with me in Port Blossom after the ruling, everything was different. They'd seen pictures of the exhibition online. They were old enough to understand, on a basic level, what had happened. "Mommy was mad about your paintings," Leo said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. "Yeah," I said, sanding a piece of driftwood on the porch of the cottage. "She was." "But they were cool," Maya added, dabbing a paintbrush into a glob of bright blue paint. "You made her voice into a picture." I smiled. I did, didn't I? There was no bitterness in their voices, just a child's simple acceptance of a new reality. They were no longer pawns in her game. They were just kids, spending time with their dad, the salt spray on their faces and paint on their fingers. My life found a new rhythm, one dictated by the tides and my children's school schedule. I bought a small house on a cliff overlooking the sea, with a large, light-filled studio. Chloe and I, our partnership forged in the fires of the exhibition, fell into a relationship that was as easy and natural as breathing. It was a love built not on sacrifice and ambition, but on mutual respect, shared laughter, and a deep understanding of what it meant to create something true. Years passed. I'm in my studio now. The afternoon sun streams through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The room is a chaotic mess of canvases, some finished, some in progress. My new work is different. The anger is gone, replaced by a sense of peace, of vibrant color. I still paint stories, but now they are stories of hope, of connection, of the rugged beauty of this life I have built. Chloe is out in the garden, her laughter carrying on the breeze. And at a large table in the corner of the studio, two teenagers are hunched over their own canvases. Leo, now 16, is meticulously sketching a complex, sci-fi-inspired landscape, his brow furrowed in concentration. Maya, 14, is gleefully making a mess, her painting a wild, abstract swirl of sunset colors that is pure, unadulterated joy. There is no talk of stabilizing or destabilizing influences. There is only the quiet scratch of charcoal on paper, the wet whisper of a brush on canvas, and the sound of the waves crashing on the rocks below. On the wall behind my easel, framed and hung in a place of honor, is a single sheet of paper. It's Julian Croft's original review from that first show. The headline is all I ever need to see. After she chose his career over our family, I chose my happiness over her manipulation. I pick up a brush, dip it in a shocking shade of cadmium yellow, and turn to my own canvas. I am no longer the man defined by her choices, the ghost of a life she tried to bury. I am the architect, and the design is finally, completely my own.